Listen, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brett Schaefer, Director of Business Development for the InSource Group, and welcome to our live webinar today, where we will discuss customer centricity, how to adapt to your customers' rapidly changing needs. And on behalf of the InSource Group and our partner, Abacus Technical Services, we are glad that you're joining us. The InSource Group has been around in Dallas since 1992, and we work with our clients to provide a competitive selection of flexible solutions for your IT staffing and recruiting needs, including contract to hire, and direct hire options. And we're really excited to be able to do this, as this is our 8th live webinar. And while we do miss seeing everyone live at an actual physical venue and actually having lunch, we're going to continue to host these webinars virtually with the hopes of getting together again here really soon. And it's really satisfying to see a lot of familiar names here today, as well as new names attending. And we are happy to be able to accommodate an increased number of attendees here. So we really appreciate this. You know, the InSource Group values the relationships of our clients and candidates. We wouldn't be here without you. So this is why we like to provide these events, you know, to reveal insight on some of the most talked about topics going on in the world of IT, as well as some items that we're challenged with every day. You know, what have we been, about a year now into this pandemic, and we've seen a lot of changes, and we're all trying to strive to figure out what the new norm is going to be like. And I think our topic today, customer centricity, is more important now than ever, because we really want to know what our customer needs are changing to a lot of degree, and how important these changes will affect our business as well. So now I'd like to turn it over to our host who will be emceeing this event, the founder of Pathways to Success, Julian Placino.
Thank you, Brett, very much for that introduction. All right, there we go. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Julian Placino. I'm the host of the Pathways to Success and your moderator for this panel all about customer centricity, adapting to your customers' rapidly changing needs. So before we introduce our outstanding speakers today, I just want to remind everyone that this is an interactive webinar. So as you have questions come up throughout the conversation, please do submit them through the Q&A. We've reserved the remaining 15 to 20 minutes of our time today to answer your specific questions. So please don't be a stranger and let us know what questions you have. So I'd like to introduce now to you our featured speakers. So first we have Dave Seaton. And Dave, do you want to give a wave to our folks in attendance here? Dave Seaton is the Vice President of Service Level Transformation at nThrive. He's responsible for designing and executing a customer experience transformation strategy that includes digital experience, voice of the customer, operational excellence, and service revenue generation. His team won the 2020 North American Customer Centricity Award for customer insight and feedback. Dave has been with nThrive for 13 years and has served in various roles, including product development, support, and operational excellence. Dave studied customer experience transformation at Harvard Business School and received a Bachelor of Computer Science from Oklahoma State University. Dave is a certified Lean Six Sigma Green Belt, as well as a certified healthcare financial professional. Dave, thank you for being with us here today.
Thanks, Julian. Thanks for that introduction.
Absolutely. And next we have Keith Walters. And Keith is the managing principal at Walters Development Group. Keith specializes in helping organizations gain stability and achieve operational excellence. His methodology incorporates leadership training, the implementation of scalable management systems, and culture development, which turns organizations into talent magnets. Most recently, Keith transformed Axiometrics from a small lifestyle company into a nationally recognized industry leader. The growth story of Axiometrics was featured in the book Rocket Fuel by Gino Wickman and Mark C. Winters. Keith is active in the business leadership community through organizations such as Vistage Worldwide and Conscious Capitalism. Keith, thank you for being with us here today.
Thank you, Julian. I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Absolutely. So let's jump right in. I want to start with some context about the organizations you currently work for and represent, so our audience has some insights into where your perspectives about customer centricity come from. And we'll start with Keith.
So what I do is I build great companies, and the last one that you mentioned, we sold a few years ago, and what we do now is work with C-suites of different companies doing advisory work and helping them scale and helping them understand their customer, grow their culture, and create excellence to meet the results that they're trying to meet.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Keith. Dave, over to you.
I work for nThrive. nThrive is a B2B healthcare technology company in the revenue cycle space. So we provide software as a service to large health systems to do things like process their claims and follow up on payments. We currently process over $1 billion of healthcare claims every day.
Awesome. Amazing. So Dave, help us start with a baseline definition. How would you define what customer centricity is and why is it important in 2021?
Customer centricity is a way of doing business. It means putting the customer at the center of your business, and all of the activities, developing products, processes, sales, marketing, is all focused around the customer and meeting the customer's needs. Now, a good way to understand this is to contrast that with the opposite, a product-centric company. And a product-centric company puts its own products at the center of everything it does. And all of the processes and activities are around those products. So if you've ever, got a hard sell from a sales company that's really trying to convince you why you need their product, that's that product-centric approach. Easiest example I can give, if we go back to 1989 and look at lettuce. Companies in 1989 were competing on the packaging and the freshness of their lettuce. But along came a company called Fresh Express, and they realized the customer didn't need a fresher head of lettuce. The customer wanted you to make the whole salad for them. And by focusing on the customer and solving the customer's problems and meeting the customer's needs, Fresh Express created this $1.5 billion industry of selling bagged salad.
Wow, I had no idea about that story. Keith, is there anything that you'd like to add to this definition?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of aspect of culture related to customer centricity, and it's not just knowing the customer, but being able to relate to the customer and understand the customer. It's one thing to put the customer, in the center and say, we're going to do this, but how do you get there? And I love Dave's example, companies founded in the 80s, and one of the companies that everyone knows about, and it was founded in the 80s, right, is Nintendo. And then I'm going to tell you, yeah, it was founded in 1889, not 1989. And I mean, that's a long life of a company. And the way they have stayed around and meaningful is because they have centered on the customer, not on the product. Because the need for, the Nintendo electronic system back in 1889 wasn't that great.
Wow, okay. And Dave, I know during our pre-interview conversation, you mentioned that you believe that customer centricity will be the number one differentiator for businesses in 2021. Why is this?
Two reasons. First reason is the differentiation between products is decreasing. As products are increasingly digital, everyone has access to the same technologies. For example, streaming video. Streaming video is not a new technology anymore. Everyone's got it. So what are streaming video companies competing on? It's the customer experience. Can we release the programming that our customers want? So the first is the differentiation between technologies is shrinking. The second is it is easier than ever for customers to switch. Because of digital, and especially after COVID, customers can switch from one brand to another easier than ever. Look at enterprise hardware. When I started at nThrive all those years ago, we had desk phones that were physical hardware on the desk. They connected to the IP network, and we used desk phones to talk to each other, both within the company and outside. And we carried around those desk phones from building to building to building as our company grew and moved. Now telephony is in the cloud. So today we're using Zoom. If we don't like Zoom, next month we can use WebEx or Teams or any other provider. So it's easier than ever for customers to switch, and the gap between different products is smaller than ever. So companies are going to have to focus on meeting the customer's needs, as Keith said, knowing that customer to remain competitive in 2021 and beyond.
Yeah, I 100% believe that. Even in just the time that everything has been going on, I've seen so many different like virtual platforms come out. So that totally makes sense. Keith, you were saying?
Yeah, if you think about B2B and B2C, a few other things that the current environment is creating opportunity for is for people at home to shop more, right? So loyalty is going to be stretched a little bit because there's this opportunity to look elsewhere that may not have been there before. And then one other aspect of today, and it has to do with the mental strain of the grind that we're in regarding coronavirus, and that is relationship. And I think companies that focus on the customer from a relationship perspective are going to be stronger in the long term. They're going to understand their customer better, and at the same time, the customer is going to feel better about that company. And in the end, if all the products are commodities, as Dave was pointing to, we commoditize faster these days, then it's really about the relationship.
Love that. So Keith, you consult with various companies and have a macro perspective on this topic. What are some symptoms of a business that indicate it needs to change how they meet the needs of their customers?
Well, the obvious one is a change in the metrics, and I'm very much a metrics-oriented person, so a change in the metrics. And by metrics, I mean the customer satisfaction, customer recurring revenue, customer retention, those types of things. One of the things that I don't like right now is the idea of, well, let's survey our customers to see how they're feeling. And the challenge is everybody is surveying. We're in this over survey arena right now. So, for me, it is listening to the customer. Are you having regular conversations with the customer and asking the questions? How are you feeling about this? Not from a survey, but from a relatable voice to voice, face to face type interchange.
Metrics. Gotcha. Dave, you have been at nThrive for 13 years. What was the most effective adaptation nThrive has made to meet the changing needs of their customers, and what should we learn from that?
Most effective, I'll tell you a story from last year. It's a good story. So March happened, and everybody went virtual, work from home. Now we're in the healthcare industry, so we deal with protected health information. And there's a bunch of government regulations around who can see protected health information. And that's very good because we don't want our personal information just exposed to anyone. So when clients, which are hospital billing offices, when they need to onboard new users, we had a somewhat dated but very safe procedure where the customer printed off the new user form, they filled it out, they signed it, they took it over to their hospital security officer, that person signed it, they scanned it, they uploaded it back to nThrive, and then we granted access to the user. A little dated, maybe, we should digitize that thing someday. It was on our roadmap. Then COVID happened. And these hospitals are trying to onboard their billing staff who are working from home, who don't have printers, don't have scanners, and can't walk next door to get the security officer's signature. So we had to pivot in a matter of weeks and roll out a solution using DocuSign and some other security measures to be able to meet those customers' changing needs as it was happening very rapidly. Now, in the months that have passed since, we've created digital forms, we've got rid of all the printing and scanning altogether for everybody. But that's one of my favorite stories about how we pivoted right there in March of 2020 and were able to meet that customer's changing need.
Love that. So when it comes to designing a customer centricity strategy, what are the questions we first need to ask ourselves to best shape that strategy? And we'll start with Keith.
Well, I think the first question you have to ask is somewhat of a hard question, and that is, does your culture support a customer-centric approach? Because you can decide, we're going to do a customer-centric approach, and if your culture is not customer-centric, then you have a much bigger problem. And so you have to ask yourself, does the culture meet a customer-centric approach? And if it doesn't, that's a big answer. It's a workable answer, but you have to start from a different place, and that's about changing your culture. The challenge with changing your culture is oftentimes changing your people. And so that's a big question. Customer centricity is something that's inside, if you will. It's a cultural element in my mind, and it can't be taken lightly, nor is it approached lightly.
Gotcha. Dave?
Yeah, I agree. That's number one. And in larger organizations, it's got to come from the top. It's got to have that executive C-suite level support to build that culture around customer centricity. It can't be a grassroots effort. If you have that culture, then the next big question is, who is your customer? Who really is your customer? Now, I'm in a B2B organization, and so it's easy for us to think about this hospital as our customer, but it's not the hospital. It's the people at the hospital. It's maybe the CFO who's making the purchasing decision. It's the VP of revenue cycle who's on the hook for an accurate accounts receivable. And it's the users who are actually logging in and using the software on a day-to-day basis. They're all customers. They all have different core beliefs, different opinions, different emotions, and different experiences. And so you really have to understand who those human beings are, and then what are their needs? What are their problems that your organization is trying to solve, and how are you meeting those needs? And with that understanding, then you can go forth and design products and services and experiences that meet those unmet needs.
Keith, as Dave was just speaking to here, one of the core things that people should do first is determine who that customer really is, because apparently that's a big thing that most miss, right? So what are the best ways to sort of figure out who the actual stakeholder and customer actually is?
Well, I think first thing you have to do is step back just a little bit and make sure everybody understands the context. Mm-hmm. And by that I mean understands the business. What is my role and what is everybody's role within the business, all the way to the external customer, and then map back from the external customer all the way back to the individual of how that individual impacts the external customer and through what channel. And then if it's through somebody else, then that next layer is the first customer, if you will. One of the things we when we were chatting beforehand, I mentioned a recent book by a guy named Horst Schulze, and I'm going to recommend this book. It's called Excellence Wins, and there's a 1-hour webinar that is very worth your time. But Horst is the former CEO and founder of Ritz-Carlton, and in it, he talks so much about knowing your customer. And one of his great examples is in the kitchen at Ritz-Carlton, the customer is the waiter, right? Now, the waiter, then the customer is the paying customer, but they have to satisfy the waiter so the waiter can satisfy the paying customer. It's knowing that chain to the external customer, which again means understanding the total context of the business.
Keith, what is that discovery process that you take your clients through to help them identify who their customer is?
Actually, Dave has some great points on that through the customer mapping process.
So a customer journey map is one tool that you can use to understand that customer life cycle. And I find we're typically very good at process maps, at flow charting out our own internal processes, but a customer journey map flips that and it takes the customer's perspective and what are the major touch points with your brand that make up the customer's experience. In our B2B software world, right, it could be learning about nThrive and then engaging the sales team and then going through contracting and then having an implementation, using the product, going into service and support, and then ultimately the renewal or the termination. That's the entire customer journey. And identifying who is the human being at each step, and then what's the experience they're having, what are the thoughts, the feelings, the emotions, the expectations, the motivations at each point. And then, like Keith says, laddering that back to internal in your company, who is delivering that and who the internal customers are. You can do a customer journey map on your internal employees. And we've done one or two of those at nThrive, and the results are very, very interesting. Seeing what it's like from an employee experience perspective, going through all the steps that this particular customer service representative has to do to meet a customer's need.
Dave, I think the customer journey map is a huge takeaway for our audience. And I don't know if that's shareable, and by no means would we ask you to give something that you can't, but can you point to tools that people could go to that would support the design and the creation of a customer journey map?
Absolutely. So there's an association, nonprofit industry association called the Customer Experience Professionals Association, CXPA. And they've got a lot of resources on customer journey mapping. There are several books. There's one called Chief Customer Officer 2.0 by Gene Bliss that talks about customer journey mapping, as well as the books by Annette Franz. I think it's called Customer Understanding. Both of those would be great resources.
Awesome. Thank you, Dave. Keith, is there any tools or resources you'd like to point our audience to?
Well, again, I'm going to mention the book, Excellence Wins. Interestingly enough, the first chapter in that book is called Getting Inside Your Customer's Head, which is key. And there's some other tools, and they're used in different areas. There's some sales tools that are very effective here as well. Asking the right questions and understanding the customer. Oftentimes, the customer's first desire or need, internal or external, is not really what the base need is. And then how do you dive down? What are the techniques? There's the sales technique of making sure you ask each question 3 times at different layers. So that's actually more of a psychological technique. But how do you drill down to the actual desire and need of what your customer is?
And if anyone in attendance here has other resources that they'd like to mention, please do type that into the chat. And of course, if Dave or Keith are responding to anything that prompts a question, please do feel free to type that into the Q&A as well. So as far as the actual strategies go, at a very high level, what are the customer centricity strategies? And we'll start with Keith.
So I'm gonna sound like a broken record here, but one of the main strategies is making sure everybody understands the business. Everybody in the business understands the business. I'll use another hotel, Omni Hotel. If you started Omni Hotel as a manager, The first 6 weeks, you may do something like push a cleaning cart and clean rooms. And the idea is to understand the business. During your life, you're going to come back and work on the front desk and other things there, so that you're just not focused on this silo, but you understand the business and all the different ways the customer interacts with the business and what the customer sees. So I think that's one of the key criteria is from a strategy perspective, in order to be customer centric, is you must really understand what you are providing, what value to the customer.
So Keith, it sounds like context is a really big piece of this, right?
Yes.
So what have you seen actually work to help departments internally understand the different roles and functions of how the business comes together?
So in the last company I ran, one of the things that we did, and we hired a lot of entry-level people, and they were hired into a calling role, and that call was going out to apartment buildings and asking things about rents and so forth. Regardless of what position you started at, and I stole this from Omni, regardless of what position you started at, you went through call training. And so, my CFO came in, and the first month he learned how to make calls. He talked to the outside people. He experienced all of that. And so understood the laying of the bricks, if you will, before diving into the specific role.
Thank you, Keith. Dave?
Absolutely agree. Anything you can do to get your employees or your colleagues to walk a mile in the customer's shoes is very worth it. I understand in today's world, not every company can send their developers to go to their customer's office and experience it firsthand. One of the things that we've done is conduct and record customer interviews where we have a team that's skilled and practiced at interviewing customers in this expansive way to understand their experience. We record those, and then we can play those back and have colleagues do an empathy map where they literally, as they're listening, they write down, what is the customer's motivation? What are they trying to do in this interaction with the company? How did you think they felt about it? And you can build customer understanding that way.
Gotcha. And I think we're already sort of talking about this, but Keith, you have said in the past that it's very important to experience the customer experience. What are some other perhaps creative ways that you've seen companies do this?
Well, I don't know if they're that creative. I work with a number of CEOs, and one of the questions I always ask is, when was the last time you called your company? Or tried to buy something from your company, or tried to schedule an appointment with your company, or send in a request through the website at info at such and such. When was the last time you put yourself in the shoes of a customer, hid who you were, and walked that line? And I'm always surprised at how isolated so many people are from the customer experience. And it takes a overt effort on a regular basis to put yourself into the shoes of the customer and experience it from that side of the fence.
Gotcha. Dave, what is a listening post, and how can we begin to implement them in our organizations?
So a listening post is a customer experience term for a place where you collect customer feedback. And it could be through customer interviews. It could be through Keith's hated surveys. It could be through colleague interviews. That's a often neglected but very important place to get customer feedback, because your frontline staff is talking to customers all day long. Have you ever asked them what the customers get frustrated with? You'll learn a lot. And then a fourth place is what I call unsolicited feedback. And if you've got a CRM or a customer relationship management or customer support ticketing system, some sort of software where you're managing these interactions, you've got a huge gold mine of unsolicited customer feedback that you can pull from your CRM. And so with all of these listening posts, if you do it well, so you're not annoying your customers by over surveying them, if you do it well, you can build listening posts throughout that customer journey and have a more holistic view of your customer's perception of your brand.
And if I might add a little bit to that, that is such a powerful piece of this. And the key to it is you have to listen. You not only do you have to have listening posts, but you have to listen. And one of the things that I have heard from these listening posts being set up, and then the feedback comes in, and there's an issue or a complaint or whatever, and oftentimes, it's dismissed because it's like, that again is an example of, does the culture really support this? But you have to listen and then dive down into what it really means.
Gotcha. Dave and Keith, so much of what we do in terms of execution has to do with the people on our team. What are keys to hiring customer-centric employees? And we'll start with Dave.
Empathy is this skill that empowers all of this customer-centric thinking. And so anything you can do to screen for empathy and emotional intelligence is going to help you identify good team members who are going to be able to get on board with the customer-centric thinking. Problem solving is another thing you can screen for. There was some great research from Matthew Dixon's book, The Effortless Experience, that showed that screening customer service agents for a take charge and problem solving attitude actually produced better results in customer service than screening for empathy. I think they're both important, but that's where I would start is developing interview and candidate screening techniques around teasing out, is this an empathetic person? Are they good at solving problems? Can they put themselves in the customer's shoes?
Dave, what does your interview process look like? What are the techniques that you've developed to screen for empathy?
I ask questions like, tell me about a difficult interaction that you had at work. Tell me that story. And as we listen to the story, is it one-sided? Is it about, well, you'll never believe what Julian did and it was so wrong, and right? Or is it, man, I had this difficult interaction and Julian was thinking this and I was thinking this, and we were able to work through it, but it took a long time. Through those stories, you can develop that understanding of a person and how they look at the world, how they look at other people, and where they are on that empathy scale.
Love it. So a lot of behavioral based questions. Thank you for that, Dave. Keith?
So, top of my list is empathy, just as Dave said. But it's not required, and I can say that because I probably score fairly low in empathy. So I think another piece of it is ownership of success. So the individual has an ownership feel, and that doesn't necessarily mean they own the company, but they own the success of the results of the company. They're passionate about it. And also part of it is understanding the business side of it. For somebody like me who is not empathetic, the business side of the empathy is very important. And I'll use another Ritz-Carlton example. Ritz-Carlton is famous for They have 22 gold standards. One of their gold standards is if you hear a problem, you own the problem. So I go into Ritz-Carlton, I go into the restaurant, I stay there overnight, I go into the restaurant. The waiter comes up and says, so how was your stay? And I'm, well, there's noise in the hallway and I really didn't sleep last night. The waiter owns the problem. Mm-hmm. And in Ritz-Carlton, the waiter has up to $2,000 to spend on me without asking for permission. And so the waiter's probably gonna do something like, I'm so sorry about that. I'm going to comp your breakfast. And when you're here for lunch, I'm going to comp that as well. So why $2,000? Well, they figured out, Horst and his crew figured out what the lifetime value of the customer was. And that $2,000 is a pittance to keep the customer based upon the lifetime value of the customer. So for a person like me that's metrics driven, that's very important. And so somebody who understands the metrics related to the business and is part of the ownership of success of the business.
Awesome. I love that story, Keith. I'm a big Ritz-Carlton fan too. And it's wonderful because it illustrates that this customer centricity and customer experience is not just woo-woo, touchy-feely stuff. We all want to be happy and empathetic. There's a real business value to it. And in Keith's Ritz-Carlton example, that customer lifetime value, I think it was around $200,000. They said, our customer's a business executive, about 40 years old. If that customer is loyal until he retires, he'll spend about $200,000 over the course of his career staying at the Ritz-Carlton. So we'll empower everybody to comp up to $2,000. And that business sense combined with the customer centricity is one of the reasons they've been able to be so successful.
Love it. I think one thing for sure that we have determined is empathy is the key skill, right? And that's hiring new employees. But when it comes to training existing employees to think and act in a more customer-centric fashion, what does that look like? What's your best advice? And we'll start with Keith.
So I think from a training perspective, there's some interactive and understanding training that can happen. Things like, how do you question people? How do you do this 3 layers of questioning? How do you ask open questions instead of closed questions? So when you are working with a customer, you can dive into the deeper aspect of what their needs are. The customer usually doesn't immediately articulate their true need. The old example of, if Steve Jobs had asked the customer what they wanted, the iPhone would never have been built. Because the customer didn't say, I want an iPhone. The Ritz-Carlton example, what does the customer want? For a long time, they thought because the customer told them, I want a place like home. They did the kind of customer inquiry that Dave talked about deeper and deeper, and they found out that wasn't true. They wanted a place like their mother's home, where they were the favorite child and everything was taken care of. And if there was any issue, they could run to mom and have it taken care of. That's what the customer of Ritz-Carlton wants. And so how do you train your employees to dive down further? Part of this is conversational skills, listening skills, and emotional intelligence.
Love that. Dave, over to you.
On the problem-solving side, Keith alluded to it, 5 whys, understanding root causes of the customer interaction, the customer problem, why they are buying that product or service. On the tactical side, we actually are in the process of creating a list of empathy and advocacy statements that our frontline customer service reps can use. You can print it out, you can have it on your desk next to your monitor, and when you're in a difficult interaction with a customer, it's right there in front of you. If you've got a customer that's upset because their report didn't run, instead of just jumping straight to, I can help you with that, right? Say, that must be really frustrating that your report didn't run. I know what it's like to work under a deadline. I'm going to help you with that. And just by changing the way that you talk to customers, you change the customer's perception of the level of effort. We've got research that shows that customers think it's easier to do business with you if you empathize and you advocate for them. And you can build out the tools so even people that aren't naturally empathetic can pull a paper off their desk and use an empathy statement or an advocacy statement to help guide through a difficult interaction. So training problem solving is great. And then also building tools that your team can use in situations where they need them.
And Julian, if I can pile onto that just a little bit, I recently sat through this and I'd never done this before. And I was just amazed at the power it brought. But that is improv training. And improv training, you know, the improv comedy, if you have an improv group, you have to support each other. You can't let anybody hang, but you don't know what's going to happen next. And I recently went through to experience some improv training, and it was one of the most amazing experiences because it is exactly that. How do you advocate and support the other people around you while still carrying on a conversation that gets deeper and deeper?
Love that. Love that. Dave, your team won the 2020 North American Customer Centricity Award for customer insight and feedback. What are the steps to fostering an exceptional customer experience?
We were starting from a place where we had to revive the patient. We didn't have our listening posts in place. We weren't getting continual feedback. And so we created an initiative. In a nutshell, we started out interviewing our clients about their experience with support. And this was pre-COVID. We actually flew to the hospital and we brought our interview team and saw their place of business, sat in their conference rooms and talked to the people, the human beings that were using our software on a day-to-day basis to get their jobs done, and talked to them about their experience. And then the team came back and they processed through all of those interviews and distilled it down to 5 themes that we saw running through the interviews. And then we surveyed our broad customer base to validate those themes using a very statistical survey called a conjoint analysis. We were able to say, you know, all 5 themes are important. They're all part of the pie, but they're not equally important. And so doing that research, we now have the qualitative and the quantitative data around what our customers value in a service experience. We were able to kind of revive that patient and then go on setting our strategy. And so that's the initiative, that's the project that my team won the award for.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I have one more question to ask our panelists. And like I said, we want to keep the rest of the time to answer your questions. Looks like we have 7 coming in. So please do submit your questions. As you can see, Dave and Keith are incredible experts on this topic, and we were here to serve you. Gentlemen, in light of COVID and everything that it comes with, what should every company keep in mind when it comes to adapting to the changing needs of their customers? And we'll start with Dave.
Listen, your customers want to tell you what their needs are. Listen, and then as Keith said earlier, be prepared to act on what they tell you.
Thank you, Dave.
And you know, exactly the same thing, just to push it just a little bit further. You know, I think in today's world, I mentioned, you know, all the stress with COVID, especially the stage we are right now, 350 some odd days into this, we're in a grind place right now. And I think people need relationship. Relationship is more important now than ever. And to me, what that means right now to meet the changing needs is to talk to the customer and make the effort. And to me, talking to the customer is not emailing the customer. It's not texting the customer. It's actually picking up the phone and calling the customer. A really interesting article in Wall Street Journal. It's probably been about a month ago about the increase in use of the phone for phone calls during the period of COVID. You know, the iPhone has very little use as a phone. It's mostly used as a texting device, right? But the use of it as a phone has drastically increased during COVID. And what they found is that we're doing all these Zoom calls, but if you really want to get, you know, kind of into a more protected place with a person when you're having a conversation, a phone call might be better. You can maybe get a little bit deeper. So just making sure you are having that communication and that you are listening. And just as Dave says, it is about more and more and more touches with the customer.
Love it. Dave and Keith, thank you very much. You guys absolutely delivered, as I knew that you would. I'm going to bring back Brett up now to finish us off with the Q&A.
Man, that was great, guys. I wonder how many people knew Nintendo had been around that long. I wasn't anticipating that. And Keith hated surveys. I don't know about that, Keith. I've taken one of your surveys. And the Ritz-Carlton stories I thought were great, guys. So thank you very much. We do have a lot of questions here. Brad would like to know, what initial steps would you take in changing from a product to a customer-driven company? And I'll let either one of you guys go with that. What initial steps would you take in changing from a product to a customer-driven company?
I think one of the first things to do would be to somehow look at, you know, as I mentioned before, evaluate your culture and evaluate your people to see whether or not they have the talent for it and whether or not the culture supports it. Once you have that knowledge, then you can start creating the strategy to do so. But it's kind of like going from point A to point B. If you don't know where you are at point A, it makes it more difficult to get to point B.
Right. Okay. All right. Dave wants to know, have you personally seen the negative effects of when companies neglect to acknowledge customer centricity? And you both are smiling.
Yeah, I've got a great story as a customer.
Right.
So last March or April, COVID happened. Like every household in America, we began looking at some of our personal expenses, seeing where we could cut back for the uncertain future. And I went to go cancel 2 subscription services that we had that we weren't really using. And the first one, I could do anything I wanted on their website, sign up for new service, expand my existing service, change my address. I could do everything but cancel. To cancel, I had to click here and chat with the chat bot, explain my problem. And then the chat bot said, well, I can't help you. Transferred me to a live agent chat where I had to wait 18 minutes because of COVID to talk to a live agent, who then immediately asked me, what can I help you with? I said, well, I already told your website and your chat bot, and now I've got to tell you again. And then before would cancel, would try and sell me on like a delayed billing or some sort of upsell. And just incredibly frustrating process, took over 30 minutes to cancel this service. And that impacted my loyalty and my willingness to come back as a customer afterwards. Now, the second thing I canceled, I'll say their name because it was a great experience. It was Netflix. I just logged into their website and clicked cancel, and I was done. And that's the difference between a customer-centric and a product-centric company.
And I'm going to pile on that. One word we didn't use that's so important here is the word friction. And, you know, all kind of friction there. You know, my negative experience, while I wasn't trying to cancel anything, I had a problem with an insurance policy at one of the major property casualty insurers. And, you know, I got on the phone to ask questions. And of course, you know, it's COVID, things are long, and we value your time. And then, of course, the recorded message came back on 2 minutes later. We value your time. And then, of course, it came back on 2 minutes later. We value your time. And 30 minutes later, I'm wondering, do you really value my time?
Right.
And as opposed to a company who's implemented technology that says, we value your time, you can either hold or you can press 1 to be put in the callback queue, and you will be called back in the order in which you called. A very simple technology solution.
Right.
And when you're a company and you make a statement, we value your time, and you don't back it up, you just lied to the customer, and lies destroy relationships. And I called to get an answer to a question, and now my insurance, all of my policies are with a different company.
Wow. We can learn from our personal experiences of negative customer service and implement that and do a better job at the company that we work with as well. So you can kind of learn from those experiences, saying, well, I sure hope my company doesn't do that.
As a training mechanism, Brendan, as a training mechanism, that's a great place to start with your employees, is
Right.
ask them, where have they had negative experience, and to talk about that. That opens up the thought process that then negative experience may be more heard about internally.
Right, absolutely. Another question, can you be both a product and a customer-focused company?
Nope.
Dave says no. Why?
Something's got to win. When it comes down to the wire and you've got to make a decision,
One or the other.
something's got to win.
Yeah. Okay. Drew had actually, when we were talking about different books, he recommended The Thank You Economy by Gary Vaynerchuk. I don't know if either of you have heard that before, but he recommended that book when we were back and looking at other sources there. Jerry wants to know, or he's asking, not everyone is client facing in an organization. What are some techniques or approaches to ensure the client needs and value are clearly conveyed to those deep in the organization?
Well, I'll disagree with them. Everybody is client facing.
Okay, to some
degree. And because, again, the waiter is the client for the kitchen. And so, Dave's customer journey map is a great example of how do you do that. And then I'll also say that, yes, everybody does kind of have a relationship with the external customer as well. You just may not see it as easily. But if you're in manufacturing, making sure there are no defects in the part makes the customer experience better.
True.
But you never talked to the customer through your voice. You talked with the customer through your operational excellence.
Your product, right. Okay. All right. Jeff is asking, can you teach someone to be empathetic?
I think you can. I'll recommend a book called Emotional Intelligence 2.0 that's just chock full of exercises that can help you build that skill.
Okay. All right.
And I agree as well. And I mentioned that improv training, I think, is a great way to understand empathy.
Kevin is asking, Keith's point about Ritz-Carlton's waiters being internal customers is very well made. One concern is having companies take customer centrism too far, with the obvious example being Amazon's mistreatment of their employees in order to provide better service to its customers. While we get all of our packages sooner, which is wonderful, Amazon employees get COVID in the distribution centers. The company steals tips from their drivers, per Amazon's recent government settlement, and so forth. In order to deliver the lowest prices, Walmart pays its employees so poorly that many qualify for food stamps. If you were to advise either of these successful and profitable companies, where would you suggest they draw the line between their focus on providing value to their customers and providing a healthy, however you want to define healthy, workplace for their employees?
And if you don't mind, this is a cultural question, and I believe the two can go hand in hand. There's a book, The Employee Comes First. And you know what? If you have happy employees, you're going to have happy customers. Southwest Airlines, the book called Nuts, it's an old book. Southwest Airlines is a great example. Now, granted, the airlines are in financial issues right now. You go back pre-COVID, Southwest Airlines, which focuses on their employees, was about half the size of United, half the size of American, with the same absolute profit number. So the two aren't separate. And one of the examples I like to use is if you look at a traditional company in a hierarchy, it's usually the lowest level of the company that has the most customer interaction. If your company is take care of the boss, 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 looking upward in the hierarchy, you're going to have a problem, because it's the people at the bottom level are going to be asked to look two ways, up to the boss and down to the customer. That's hard. And what are they going to prioritize? Looking up. And so, a servant leadership service organization typically is going to have better customer centricity.
Okay, now that makes sense. That's a good example. Another question, once you have an established process to screen talent for empathy and work on training or adjustments for existing employees, what are the top recommendations for continual improvement and or monitoring of your customer centricity?
I think having those listening posts in place and rolling up to a larger voice of the customer program is central. And then, of course, the organization has to be aligned to act on the feedback coming through the voice of the customer program.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if the customer says the product is hard to use, product development has to be committed to making the product easier to use because of the customer feedback.
Right. Okay. Very good. Tina is asking, interested in ideas that you may have on using this approach now during COVID and even post-COVID as it's changed the way we gather and meet. She asked that towards the end of y'all's conversation. So again, she was just interested in the ideas that you may have in using your approaches now and during COVID and even post-COVID, and how it's changed the way that we gather and meet.
So I think through a Zoom type environment, using other tools, blind tools for surveys. Zoom has some capability on that. Other tools have some capability on that. But how can you stimulate people to get engaged in the conversation without feeling, placed, in the center highlight if they're not someone who is comfortable with that? That's one of the examples of tools that I've seen beneficial come out of this. Is some of the blind survey, some of the word cloud and other type tools that can be used to gain an understanding of emotion.
Right. Okay. And I'm going to limit. We have a few more questions. The questions have been great, but we really try to keep this to right at 1 hour. And I know I'm running up on 1 o'clock, so I'm going to ask the last question here. Owner success versus empathy can be applied to improve in parallel for customer centricity, or would it be better to use one method?
Dave, any thoughts? I'm gonna let you.
What was the first phrase? Owner success?
Owner success versus empathy can be applied to improve in parallel for customer centricity, or would it be better to use just one method?
I'm not familiar with the term owner success.
So I think I mentioned the concept of ownership success and
right.
Feeling, and that's different than owner success.
Okay.
That is an individual exhibiting the attribute of owning the results, owning success, not necessarily owning the company. So it's about the sense of ownership of success, ownership of results.
Okay.
I think they go hand in hand. I don't think they're different.
Okay, very good. Julian, would you like to come back on here? First off, this is great, guys. I really appreciate it. Julian, thank you for your leadership and your thoughtfulness and your questions. This was great. Dave, Keith, outstanding job. We really appreciate your time and your insight today. If anybody else has additional questions, don't hesitate. Get in contact with us. We'll run it by the panel and get right back to you on this. Also, if anybody has any hiring needs we can assist you with, contact us, as we're seeing company hiring really pick up here at the beginning of 2021. And I hope everyone has a great day, and we will see you next time. Thanks, everybody.